Well, they brought me back for another day. Happy Draft Day Eve, everybody. It is Birds 365, and we've got 35 hours, 57 minutes, and 50 seconds, John McMullen,
Wow.
until the NFL draft. And we've got you covered with a big day here on Birds 365. Mike Gill filling in. John McMullen never goes away. What's up, buddy?
Yeah, I can't wait for it to get here, man. I wish I could turn off my phone in these last 2 days because the rumors just tilt up and you're like, yeah, look in different ways.
Well, we're going to
Boy,
sniff out the rumors. Which ones are rumors and which ones have some substantiation to them?
trading
Bob
up,
Groats.
that's got some substantiation. That's
All
about
right,
it.
hold up there. I'm going to set the scene. Bob Groats next hour. Bob Brookover. It's What About Bob Day here on Birds 365. We've got the draft hits and misses. I'll give you my three favorite players at 22 right now. I put the list together, and I finally have come down to the three players that I would be most happy with. John, I know you have some trade-up thoughts. And Rodgers' role, Isaiah Rodgers has been reinstated. So let's start with the player that's already on the team. Why don't we hear? Isaiah Rodgers, a kind of out of sight, out of mind guy. He was gambling, and he got suspended for the year. So he has not played in one full calendar year. He has been reinstated by the league, and he is now back. And there's a lot of speculation about what his role is, what he is, what do they see him as? Does that change their draft day plan? Because now they have this guy. I imagine they thought they were going to have him, so that probably wouldn't trade much. But give everybody a little background on who he is and what potential role, because certain people look at him as an outside guy. Some say, he can play inside, but he's more suited for the outside. So what do you kind of see Isaiah Rodgers being reinstated? Big deal? Not that big of a deal. What do we got?
I would say somewhere in between. Yeah, I think a lot of people have talked themselves into him being some kind of difference maker, shapeshifter. The Eagles signed him essentially to $1 million 1-year deal. And it's one of those things the Eagles do that maybe they see a little bit of a market inefficiency. They're willing to be patient and wait for him to be reinstated. And that's what happened. And all of a sudden they have a legitimate NFL player in the mix. But, I got that question a lot. Does this change them to offensive line or something else away from cornerback? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. If they want a top tier cornerback and they're going up to draft a top tier cornerback, Isaiah Rodgers is not going to affect that thinking. Not
I would imagine
remotely.
they had the plan. They already had planned for him returning. So all of
Yeah.
their draft stuff leading up to this point would still be within mind that he was going to be here.
Yeah. I mean, the assumption was he was going to be back unless he gambled again. And then you chalk it up to we made a mistake and you move on. But he's back in the mix. He's, the inside outside thing is interesting to me because he played outside in Indianapolis the vast majority of the time. He's got about 1,000, just over 1,000 career snaps. 917 of them are outside. And, you have two groups of people who say he's a slot corner because he's 5'10" and 170 pounds. And the other people is an outside corner because he played outside in Indianapolis. Well, for those who don't know, Indianapolis had Kenny Moore, still has Kenny Moore, who might be, he's in the conversation for being the best slot cornerback in football. So he's not getting on the field in the slot in Indianapolis. And they needed an outside corner. They tried him. He's played about 400 or 500 snaps over the past 2 years. So part-time player, and he's held up pretty well. And, the potential's there for him to get better. Where does he fit? If you're drafting Quinyon Mitchell, Terry and Arnold in the first round, you might want to look at him in the slot. If Avonte Maddox stays healthy, you might want to look at him outside as a backup there. But, the Eagles have the Eagles to me, aren't in the need of developmental players at cornerback. I think they have, especially outside. I think they have two good ones in Kaylee Ringo and Eli Ricks. Might not be ready right now, but I don't think you're concerned about finding another developmental piece out.
I brought this up last week, John, that if you don't draft one in the first round and get like that high level one, are you okay with the room that you say, you know what, we don't really need to focus on a guy in the fourth or one of those fifth round picks because we've got a bunch of those guys. Why crowd the room? Go add depth at other. Or is that not the way these teams?
Yeah,
think?
I kind of look at it the same way, but I'd like to add a slot player because the reality is
That's
that
true.
on day 3, I'm talking about, not early, day 3, in that situation you're talking about. Abante is a really good player, but you can't count on him. You have
Can't
to be
count on him.
realistic, and he's down to a 1-year deal now. So even that, if he plays well, then you have to make that difficult decision. All right, is he going to hold up? He's going to get more money than we want to pay him. So you might only have him for 1 more year. Either way, good scenario, bad scenario on the field. And then they signed Tyler Hall, who's a traditional slot cornerback in free agency, but it's not somebody you're going to count on. Zach McPherson's going to be back from his torn Achilles for the final year of his rookie deal, but he's on the final year of his rookie deal. There's no guarantee that he's going to be anything meaningful. So I could see him on day 3 adding a slot player. But yeah, not an outside corner, because I think you have developmental players on the outside that you should be very excited about, to be honest, especially Ringo. Rick's, but even Rick's a great coverage guy, by the way.
Yeah, but those guys all project more as outside guys, right? I mean,
Ringo and Rick's, and that's part of the problem with Rick's. Poor Rick's, big 6'2" long guy, forced to play in the slot. So many guys were playing out of position last year in the slot. Bradbury, Ricks, Sidney Brown is a safety. They had to play him in the slot, and they look bad. Well, of course.
Just, for, envision, you got guys who were the smaller, quicker wide receivers in the slot. You guys like your Edelmans and like the small, quick guys who just catch, turn, and get up the field. You got a 6'2" guy trying to stick with him, not conducive. So that's why you take a look at like the guys that we mentioned. They don't really, you can't just say, well, he's the corner, put him in the slot. That's not really the way that it would work. But with Rodgers, he does have a profile that would be more of a inside guy, even though he's done more of his work on the outside.
Yeah. And again, that was circumstance. If you want to get on the field in Indianapolis, it's not going to be a slot unless Kenny gets injured. Kenny Moore gets injured. So,
now, would you say that if Avonte Maddox is healthy, that he would clearly be the slot guy?
Yeah, to me would be, if he's got, if it hasn't affected his skill set, and he's still a young guy. So there's no evidence to me that he was declining as a player from a skill set or trait standpoint. It was all about injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the reason with Abante. Abante plays like he's 6'2", 205, and he throws his body around. Yeah. And he ends up getting hurt, which is, obviously a catch-22. But yeah, Abante Maddox is better, completely healthy in a pristine world. Yeah, Abante Maddox is better than Isaiah Rodgers.
Yeah. So I'm very green at hosting this show. This is only like the 4th time I've done it, but I'm looking at some of the comments and I can't see that well, but I do say, somebody says, I didn't know Eli Ricks was 6'2". You know what's funny? I didn't know that either. And I looked it up. Yes, he is in fact 6'2". I didn't realize he was that wiry. Right. Yeah. I didn't realize he was that wiry of a guy. And that's why he doesn't project well in the slot. You've got a bunch of guys, though. You mentioned Ricks, Mekhi Gardner. I think there's Kelly Ringo, as you mentioned before. There's a plethora of guys. It's just so interesting that none of them are really slot projections, that they got all these guys that are all outside. And then, of course, Bradbury and Slay are the two guys they have there. Now you bring Rodgers into the fold. So there's certainly a lot of competition in this room. But, John, there could be more competition in the room, and it could be high-level competition. Some murmurs beginning. We talked about it yesterday that the Eagles could look to trade up and a corner could be on the mix. But is one particular corner the one they desire more than anybody?
Well, it will be, yes. The question is, which one is it? And it really comes down to two players, Terrion Arnold and Quinyon Mitchell. And I've been bouncing back and forth on this. To me, Mitchell's got the higher ceiling, and that's an Eagles pick. But I've talked to a number of scouts, and they say Terrion Arnold would be a better fit for the Vic Fangio scheme. And I've kind of gone back and forth with that because it's been pretty consistent. And yesterday, as I said, you get all this information and now I'm tilting back to where I started, and that's Quinyon Mitchell. Because to me, he's the one guy who could turn into the Sauce Gardner type player, the Patrick Surtain type player, the JC Horn, if he ever stayed healthy, type player that the Eagles have been interested in. And, the scheme, they've been playing the same scheme for 3 years. This will be the 4th year they're playing essentially the same scheme. But, Big 65, he's a senior citizen. He's not going to be here for the long haul. In the best case scenario. So I think you can't get caught up in this guy's a better fit for a scheme if you think the other guy's much more talented, because you might change coaches down the road a year or two. We know the Eagles' history, and they might bring in a different scheme. And all of a sudden you need more of a press cover corner. And he's talented enough, Quinyon, to do everything. So, too much of NFL draft talk is about, you're going to draft a good player or a bad player. Well, player development's a big part of it. And you got to develop players, and you probably want the guy with the higher ceiling. So now I'm kind of tilting back to Quinyon Mitchell. But those are the two names, Quinyon and Terrion Arnold. If the Eagles are going up, and many have speculated, the big talk is 12 or 16. I can tell you this: 12 is Denver, 16 is Seattle. Seattle always trades down. Denver looks like they want to manipulate to get Bo Nix later in the draft. They're not going to draft him at 12. They're not comfortable with that, and they shouldn't be. But there's a lot of moving parts. Pittsburgh wants Quinyon Mitchell as well. They might be trying to trade in. And the most interesting part is 11 is Minnesota, and they desperately need a corner. But obviously, they're trying to go up and get a quarterback.
So they also need a quarterback.
But why I add that in, because if they can't get up, and they want Drake May, if they can't get up, and New England might very well just take Drake May at number 3, and they can't get up, their next most important position they need is cornerback. And then all of a sudden, he might not get past 11 in the worst case scenario for Minnesota. So just because the Eagles want a player doesn't mean they're going to get him. But the one thing you can feel very comfortable about is they're trying to trade up.
Yeah, well, I thought yesterday when we talked to Les Bowen and Martin Frank, they both told the story of, this Eagles trying to sit and wait for a player and teams passing over them in the 2014 draft. And last year we saw the Eagles move up one spot, and people say, why would you move up one spot? And they said, we're never going to let that happen again. So if there's a player that they specifically want, we can all believe that they're going to do everything they can to try to go get that player. The question would be, how far up do they have to go? And that's where, those projections get so crazy. I was talking about Bill Belichick was on the McAfee show talking about, like, hey, we're on the board and things are just happening that you never projected that would happen.
Yeah.
You never saw this happening or that happening. And boom, all of a sudden Vince Wilfork's available. So we took him. In no situation did they think they were going to get Vince Wilfork. So you never know what's going to happen. But in that moment, this is where you can be confident that you have Howie Roseman making those quick decisions that can think quickly on his feet to reverse course, change course, or rip up the sheet and start right from scratch. So if Mitchell's the guy and they want him and they have the ammunition to get him, rest assured they'll have him if it's doable.
Well, by the way, Mike, I saw a wild scenario this morning. Now, most of the speculation is sort of centered down to the Eagles are going to trade up to try and get a corner. Now, it was Jeremy Fowler and Dan Graziano, so very plugged in from ESPN. They said they might try to trade up for a receiver. And there's even a little bit of news seeping in about Brock Bowers at tight end.
All right. Well, we'll get into all that. Those are the fun things because the skill players become a very interesting conversation. The wide receiver one is an obvious tie to the future of A.J. Brown.
Exactly.
And the tight end situation is an obvious tie to what they've done to the past at that position. So let's set that all up. Bob Brookover is here from NJ.com. Was with the Eagles beat, then the Giants beat. He's back with the Eagles beat now. So we'll get tons of insight and speculation. Let it all begin as we are on the eve of the NFL draft. It's one of the great days in football. The future starts now. We see many people streaming in today on this draft eve on Birds 365. Stick around.